Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello and welcome to this episode of our program. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle, and today we're privileged to have with us Bob Littell, who is with NetWeaving International. Welcome to the program, Bob.
Well, thanks, Mike. It's great to be here.
Super. Well, give me a little bit of background on yourself and what led you to create NetWeaving International, and what is NetWeaving?
Well, frankly, I'm a guy that started out in sales and was pretty much a failure. Part of that was I was just way too analytical for my own good, and anybody who wanted to stop and wait and think about it, heck, that's what I do, so why not? And over time, though, I developed what I would call, whether you want to call it a relationship building, a communication model, but it just focused more on getting to know people. And the more that I got to know people and the more that I got to know successful salespeople, I would pull an idea here, pull an idea there. But the people in sales who impressed me the most were the ones that knew how to build trusted relationships. And frankly, one of the things that I'd always been good at over my life was introducing people to each other, and also always trying to be kind of the go-to person, finding a way to be a resource for others, no strings attached, just as a way of building a trusted relationship and hopefully growing that relationship. So the three skill sets of NetWeaving tie into that being, first, learning how to be a better connector of other people with their needs in mind rather than your own. Secondly, learning how to position yourself as this gratuitous resource information provider so people call you when it has nothing to do with your own business or your own trade or whatever it is. They call you simply because they know that you've got this incredible network. And that ties into the third skill set of NetWeaving, which is constantly being on the lookout for people who are exceptional at what they do. And when you find one of those, you find a way first to help them, and then hopefully over time make them part of what we call your trusted resource network. Mm-hmm. So those are the three skill sets. But there's a lot of people that do those without really thinking about it. The thing that I think has set NetWeaving apart is the action step. And the action step is intentionally always looking for ways to really take it to the next level. And whether that's being at a networking meeting where I see you and all of a sudden I say, hey, Mike, I just saw somebody across the room who you really need to meet. And I drag you across the room and make that introduction. Or we're talking on the telephone like right now, and all of a sudden I say, Mike, I just thought of somebody, Mary Jones, who you really need to meet. And I'll tell you what, Mike, send me your bio, or I'll tell you what, is your LinkedIn profile current? Because if it is, I'll just send that to her, send her to your LinkedIn, and then I'll also send her your bio, or I'll find out if Mary's bio is up on LinkedIn. And I just love to make that connection between the two of you, assuming you would like to meet each other. But the third... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I love it because that is putting actions into concepts, and you can't just know it in your head. You've got to do it. So continue with that third.
Well, the third one, and this is where I'm learning over the 16 years that I've been doing this, that some people will only do those first two levels, and that's great. They'll increase the connections they're making for others. And that's what I call level 1 and level 2 NetWeaving, meaning that what you're doing is you're doing them either in person where you're at a meeting and you're introducing people to each other, or you're doing it on the telephone and always listening for who do I know that I could connect that person with. So those are kind of level 1, level 2, or really they're both kind of what I would call level 1. Level 2 and level 3 involve what I call hosting meetings, where you not only recognize that there are two people who would benefit meeting each other. But in this case, I'd go to the next step and I'd say, Mike, you know what? I'd really like to host a meeting to introduce you to this lady. And I'll tell you what, I'll send you her bio and vice versa. I'll send yours to her. And after the two of you decide if you would like to meet each other, I'd like to host a meeting to introduce the two of you to each other. So the second complete level of NetWeaving is hosting meetings where you not only introduce the two people, but you actually facilitate the meeting. And we have ways that we can maximize the chances that you will find ways to help the two people discover ways to help each other, and also at the same time help them really find people who they know in common that they never would have guessed if you hadn't have made that connection. But have you ever read a book by Judy Robinette called How to Be a Power Connector?
No.
Well, Judy started out as a social worker, and over time she decided the world wasn't ready to be saved yet, and went to work inside a Fortune 500 company in HR to start out with. But Judy found out, without ever using the word NetWeaving or hosting, she started making connections for powerful people and making those kind of introductions, where today Judy is one of the most connected women in the world, or people in the world, with what she calls her platinum Rolodex with 6 billionaires in it.
I think that's going to be the next book that I purchase, so I will. I've made a note of that. I mean, literally, I bought your book and read it, and I'm going to be reading this one. You know, here's something that is really jumping out to me through your introduction. And you think of networking, and you hear some of these people talk about, you know, hey, networking is networking, right? And they put the emphasis on working. You can't just, you know, it's not show up at the chamber meeting with your handout and your business cards and expect business. And NetWeaving, weaving is an action word like working, but yet you're putting some doable steps into the process. And I would almost wonder if, you know, too many times people go to these functions, whatever it might be, chamber or Rotary or whatever function, and they end up just with their coffee in their hand and chatting with the people they already know, right? And if they would go to that event with even just with the goal of making one connection, not 19, but if they were to start talking to a few people, and then remember, my kids are, one of my daughters turned 16 today, and I've got a 12-year-old, a 14, a 16, and an 18-year-old, but I remember when they were little, they had the matching game, and you would turn over two things, no, that's not a match, and you'd find the match.
Exactly.
What if you could do a matching game for NetWeaving in the sense that you show up at the chamber meeting and you talk to that first person, okay, hey, good to see you, and then now you're on a mission to find someone that would match them that you can run back to and make that connection. And if you did that, only that, during that chamber meeting, and you got nothing out of it, but you made that connection and they appreciated that, you have succeeded.
You have stolen one of my analogies, because I love that game, memory. And
cool.
I used to play it as a kid. But, you know, I've also extended the game, and this is going to be a longer-term project because it's very big. But I've come up with something called the NetWeaver's Quilt. And imagine that you're looking at a quilt, okay? And imagine quilts. The interesting thing I love about a quilt is all the squares look the same, but everyone is individually hand-woven, and so they're all really different. So imagine that you're looking at a quilt with, let's just make it easy and say 25 squares, 5 up, 5 over, 5 down, okay? You with me?
Mm-hmm.
You're the bottom right-hand square, okay? The upper left-hand square is anyone in the world who you want to meet. The 3 squares that surround that person are either gatekeepers or gate openers. And as you well know, treated correctly, a gatekeeper becomes a gate opener.
Mm-hmm.
Every other square in the quilt are someone who either has something in common with the person, or on the vertical axis is power and influence. The higher up you go, the more powerful, the more influence. So I'm going to be creating a game where first you have to put the person in the right square according to commonality, which is the horizontal scale, and vertical, which is the power and influence scale. And then by industry, we're going to have various games where you have to come up with a strategy of how you're going to meet that person by finding people in the squares that connect you, but you first have to find a way to help them.
Mm-hmm.
So
it only unlocks when you do a gesture like an introduction or something like that.
Yes, exactly. So
are you thinking of making this like a app kind of a game?
Oh, yes, an online game. And actually, I could see how this could be a tremendous game, and maybe you and I ought to talk about that later.
Yeah, really. I mean, I have zero ability in app development, but you can find those people wherever. But I'll tell you this: if we could,
access to them.
Yeah, I mean, there's people out there. If that was developed and done in the next 10 seconds and working the way that it needed to be, right? Could you imagine the power of going to any chamber of commerce in the country and going, because one of their struggles in any business networking, call it BNI, and BNI is a little different because you're paying to be there big time, but chambers and these other networking events, they struggle because people don't show up as much. But if it became this gamification concept like you described, and it's not going to give results right away, because really you're kind of laying the groundwork and you're making that connection and you're tapping this and making those internal infrastructures. But then I can envision too, like you see those things on TV or the internet, the stock charts where it goes, hey, when it's red, you don't buy. When it turns green, you buy. Well, when it's red, you've just made the connection. When it's yellow, you've made an introduction. When it's green, it's like, hey, we've got a match. So I think that really makes a lot of sense, but it brings to tangible light what you've been teaching with NetWeaving. And I love that, but I also love another thing you said, which is, I think, the step 2 of facilitating a meeting. And I would say that some people would hear that and go, yeah, an email, Tom meet Fred, Fred meet Tom, hey, thought you might like to talk, bye. And that you would feel like is an intro, but in reality, it is a lob over the bow that really might fall into the ocean. And I've noticed so many times, even recently, when you go to a training event and you are taught this one concept and you think at first glance, well, of course I know that, but they spend enough time on it and you're already out of your element at this event, let's say, that you walk away going, that was an aha moment. But if that had just been sent to you in a PDF email or a video, you would have glanced right over it and never would have absorbed it. So that email intro might seem to work, but when you set up a conference call, let's say, because a lot of people can't do a coffee because they work, all across the country.
Definitely.
But if you go to an app, I forget, there's some website out there where it basically is, hey, let's set up a call. Here's this calendar over the next 2 weeks. Click on the dates that would work for you, and 2 or 3 people are doing that. And then the ones that everyone are lined up with, you can see that date, and then all of a sudden you don't have to go, does Tuesday work, does Friday work? Then the multiple people are going, yep, that day works. And if that conference call happens 15 minutes and you're just sitting back listening after you make the intro, now it's coming to life because it's something more than just some email.
Well, you hit a great point, because what's happening in the visual world is that ability to set up and host a meeting is not going to have to be, you hit it exactly on the head, does not have to be a physical meeting. It's great if you are there in person, because to a certain extent, one of the things that I tell people is I say, one reason to do it in person is this concept isn't right for you unless when you finish hosting that meeting, you walk out of the meeting higher than the 2 people that you put together. Because the energy that you get from watching them find ways to help each other discover people they know in common. But let me finish the difference between level 2 and level 3. Level 2, the hosting meetings that you're setting up, whether it's on the phone, Skype, or in person, are people at your own peer level or below. Mm-hmm. What Judy did, and what I was doing before I ever read her book, I was setting up CEOs of some of the largest companies in the world with somebody who I know they would want to meet. One time I ended up, and it never ended up being one in person because, as I said, their schedules changed, but Ralph de la Vega, the CEO of AT&T, who is a super guy, and a guy named Ozzie Aru, who's the CEO of Tyler Perry Studios here in Atlanta. Turns out the two of them both came over as children from Cuba, speaking no English, and look where they are today. So the third level is understanding that when you make connections for people far above your own network, guess what? Over time, you get pulled up into higher and higher levels. And that's how Judy, over time, developed that platinum Rolodex.
Yeah, you bring up a massive point, and it's not even just a thought that you brought up. This is what you teach in your book. But I just put together a little course called Interviewing Influencers, and it's about the same concept where here's the gist of what you said and what my course is. If you interviewed store stock clerks at 7-Eleven, okay, that's interesting. I'm sure they have some stories to tell. But if you interviewed CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and you start putting that out there to your network, social media, whatever, how do people perceive you if you're interviewing the 7-Eleven clerk or the CEO of a Fortune 500 company? You then start being perceived and seen in those realms, and it's almost like, you ever heard that sports analogy? I think that it was Wayne Gretzky that says, I skate to where the puck is going. Not where it is, because if I'm skating to where it's going, I'm going to be there. Well, all of a sudden, you are working with and networking with people that you want to be at their level, but to get there, you're connecting them up or communicating with them, and they're going to, the example you gave, like, oh my word, yeah, Cubans, and we can't, and if you were the one that made that connection and then just stepped back, both of those individuals would be perceiving you as, hey, I really, what can I do for you? And I literally, let me tell you this testimonial for you. After I read your book, and this was a couple years ago, I had lunch with someone, and I spent the entire time helping and asking and giving some pointers and whatever, and ended the lunch, and he literally said these words to me. Oh my goodness, you've been so helpful to me. What can I do for you? And I was like, bingo, hallelujah. And can you do that every single conversation in life and business? No, but you need to be proactive about that.
Yeah. Well, you know what your interview example ties in so closely with my Don't Need to Read the Book club. I don't know if you remember this, but 6 years ago, I'm real active at the Buckhead Club in Atlanta, which is one of Club Core properties. And we started a book club, and we were lucky to get 3 or 4 people there, busy business people. If they hadn't read the book, they didn't feel like they could really contribute to the conversation. So I said, you know what, I love to write, and I'm going to try calling a famous author. Well, one of my favorite authors in today's business world is Dan Pink, A Whole New Mind, To Sell is Human, and several others. In fact, he's working on a new one right now. But I called him and asked permission. I'm now on my 42nd book. So these are authors like Dan Pink, Adam Grant, the youngest tenured professor at the Wharton School, Malcolm Gladwell, you name it, Susan Cain, The Power of Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. And that's how I sent and wrote the summary of Judy's book, which I'll send to you, Judy Robinette's book.
Mm-hmm. Oh, nice.
So those connections, what I didn't understand at the time that I started doing them, my gosh, Jeffrey Gitomer, who already is a big fan of NetWeaving.
Yeah.
His book. He actually has a chapter in his book on NetWeaving, and a great story. So you're exactly right. Whether it's interviewing, whether it's calling up an author to be able to get permission to write a summary of one of their books.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And you mentioned gatekeeper. I'll guarantee you this. If you were to contact an influencer or CEO power person, their gatekeeper, this is the one single way that gate will get flung wide open.
Oh, wide open.
Right? Hi, I am Joe Schmo, and I'm with blah, blah, blah show, and I would love to do a piece or an interview piece with so-and-so on my show. It's just a 20-minute phone interview, and actually this gets syndicated out through iTunes and iHeartRadio and many other places. Do you think that you could see about getting me on his calendar for a 20-minute phone call, because we would love to interview him on, and you fill in the blank with something you know about them, even maybe like a cause or a charity, something where, because, like Richard Branson, I want to interview him about entrepreneurship. How many gillions of times does he get interviewed on that? But if you knew some snippet, some tidbit about him, like he loves whatever it is, we would love to interview him about his passion about boom.
Yes.
All of a sudden, that gatekeeper is like, hold, please. And they're like, okay, let's do it next Thursday at whatever. And I think that right there is the key to open up those gatekeepers.
You got it. You hit it right on the head.
Hey, going back to that earlier point we made about connecting people if you cannot do it in person, if you have these high-powered people and their schedules and your schedule and another person's schedule, come on, how are you going to get a time there? So that tool that I was mentioning is called Doodle, Doodle, and it's free. I think there's a paid version, but I've used it numerous times free, and basically you send out an email invite to the two people, yourself and the two people, and say, hey, I would love to connect you guys to talk about something interesting that I learned about both of you. What days would fit your schedule? And then I'll send back the day that lines up with all three of us. And you send this link, and it's this little calendar, and person one goes, Tuesday at 9, Thursday at 8, and Wednesday at 2.
Wow.
And then the other person clicks on theirs, and then you are watching this happening, and then you go, oh, Thursday at 9 lined up for everyone, and you send out the invite, and it's going to be taken or used because everyone said that's when they had free. So that's a nice little tip, doodle.com.
Well, I'm going to Doodle the minute we get off the phone.
Okay, good. And given that it's free, I don't get any benefit for that, but that's just a wonderful tool. And here's another thing you mentioned earlier, people seeing you as a resource. I know I've got a client of mine that probably every other week sends me an email and goes, oh, hey, do you have any recommendations on, and the interesting thing is many of these questions are, and it's a high-level client, so I don't mind taking, requests like that, but many of these things I'm going, I could just Google, or she could just Google that and find it out, but when they need something, they think of me. They need something, they think of me. So I give that advice to them, like, oh, that is so awesome, thank you so much, and it's like, man, so many times we could be seen as a wonderful resource in advance and above a Google, because why? Because they know you, like you, and trust you.
Well, before Google, and I would always, when I meet somebody at a chamber meeting or at a networking event of any kind, I'm going to follow up with an email. Gee, I really enjoyed meeting you, and I really enjoyed our discussion on leadership. And oh, by the way, here's one of the best articles that I think I've ever read. Well, I used to have file cabinets of great articles divided by topic matters. And when I'd have that discussion, whether it's on branding, on leadership, on customer service, whatever it is, I'd pull out, make a copy of that article, and send it along, either back in the snail mail days, actually in a letter, but then email came along, and then I could scan it and send it. Now, guess what? Those cabinets are gone, because as you just said, I thank God for Google. Thank God for Wikipedia. thank good.
But you know what? These days you can do, and using a technology tool, I'm sure you've heard of Evernote. Well, when you do run across those articles, and you just have the little, I use Chrome, but you use the little Chrome snipper.
Right.
So right at the top of my Chrome, I'm looking at the little icon of an elephant. So if I see an article that's good, I go click, it opens up my Evernote, and I can put it in any folder I want and then tag it.
Wow.
Well, then when you come across someone that's like, oh yeah, I'm looking for neuroscience, art or whatever the topic is, you go to your Evernote, do a quick search, and you find that link, you email it to them, and there it is, because you're just kind of out there just collecting, and you don't need paper files for that. But if Evernote is free, again, another free tool, but that sits on your tablet, your phone, and your desktop. And when you clip that and save it, and you're out and about at Starbucks or something, and you're meeting with someone, you pull out your phone, you're like, oh, I've got just the thing here for you. Click, 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 tag. Here it is. Let me email you the link, and it's with you all the time.
Wow. Getting back to another point you started making about being at a chamber meeting and how ineffective so many people are in networking at meetings, I give a piece of instruction, especially to people who are the ones who feel more like an introvert. They'd rather be anywhere in the world than at this big networking event with a ton of people that they don't know.
But they know they should be there, so they're there.
If they do know people, just as you said, they're going to go hang out with the people they know as opposed to making. I tell people, here's a totally different mindset, especially for analytical people to go into that networking event with. You're on a research mission, and your goal is to find interesting people in industries and professions that you know very little about. And I have a concept I call GLP, global, local, personal. Mike, I really... I think I heard you say something about you're in the widget industry, and frankly, I don't know very much about the widget industry, but I'd love to learn more. If you had to describe today the 2 or 3 challenges that the widget industry is experiencing and in some cases suffering with today, how would you describe those, either on if it's global or a national basis? And is your own company, ABC Widgets, are those the same things that keep your company and you awake at night? Or have you discovered some secrets you'd be willing to share with me about ways you've found to overcome those challenges? Well, that GLP, global, local, personal, is such an easy way to apply it to any industry and to get a conversation that gets below what I call the superficial, how about them dogs, as we say here in Georgia, kind of conversation that elevates it to what I call in NetWeaving terminology, meaningful dialogue, where there's learning and growth, where I'm learning about your business, learning about your industry, and guess what? You learned things about industries that you know nothing about that are going to make you more interesting at that next
and I'll guarantee you this, 8, 9, 12 conversations down the road, you're going to find something come up where you're going to use a tidbit of that knowledge you got from that conversation in that next conversation, just because you're picking up knowledge along the way. And I would say this, if someone was listening to this going, yeah, this sounds awesome, that sounds great, here's the caveat. Here's what you need to keep in mind, or else the whole thing implodes. Don't try it once and go, oh, that just didn't work, because number one, people can smell out if you were just trying some gimmick to get something back. It's got to be NetWeaving for the love and cause and serving of NetWeaving, and you might have to make 37 connections before you get anything back on it. And at some point, that pump is primed, and you're going to make that connection. People are going to email back, oh, thank you so much, and you're going to go, cool, that felt good. And the thought might sweep through your mind, oh, I wonder, is this really going to work? And then at some point, that tipping point, like you mentioned Malcolm Gladwell, the tipping point then is going to be, 4 months ago, you made this connection, and then they come back and make a connection to you, and boom, it made it all worthwhile. So I would just say that you would agree 1,000% with this. Do it for the sake of doing it, not because you're going to get something from it, and you got to keep your head down and keep plugging away, knowing that it's a worthy cause.
Well, I'll give you a real life example. One time, having one of those conversations, And in a group of about, I think it was 3 or 4 people, one guy now is telling me about the problems within his industry and how they're getting around it with his own company. And then he says, uh-oh, now you can't say anything to anybody on this because it's going to be in the Wall Street Journal tomorrow morning.
Yeah, that's how things work sometimes.
It's just
crazy.
Really fun. And the interesting thing is, this is very important. The 3 skill sets of NetWeaving, once again, learning how to be a better connector of others, a gratuitous resource for others, and building that trusted resource network. More technologically oriented, and this is a generalization, but more highly analytical, technologically oriented people are not as comfortable as you and I would be in roving around a room and making these connections and doing it almost, or unconsciously. But if you can help them learn how to be a gratuitous resource for others, help them build this reputation as the go-to person, it builds up their self-confidence to a point that I've had some great success stories and highly analytical people who all of a sudden they blossom into this incredible connector of others because they're getting all this positive feedback and thanks for the resource providing and the information that they're providing other people. Mm-hmm. So it's a great way to think, well, maybe this person ought to start out rather than focusing more on the first skill set. And incidentally, one of the things that I'd love for you to make sure that people do is go to the NetWeaving website and have them take the NetWeaver's Aptitude Assessment Quiz. It's free. Okay. None of the information is retained, and it's divided into 4 sections. The first section is your general attitude towards the concept of altruism, doing something for someone without any intention of how you're going to get paid back or how you're going to benefit. Then the next 3 sections are the 3 skill sets.
Well, this is the section of our interview that I was getting ready to ask. So, Bob, we could talk for hours and hours and hours, I think you can tell.
You're not kidding.
So let's land the plane and say, how can people learn more about NetWeaving, your book, your program? So that assessment quiz sounds exactly what would be a great compass for people to take. So what's the best way that they can take advantage of that?
Well, the best way is to go to the NetWeaving website, take the NetWeaver's quiz. About 16 years ago when I started this, the second book I wrote called The Heart and Art of NetWeaving, Arthur Blank, the co-founder of Home Depot and the owner of the Atlanta Falcons, is the testimonial on the front cover saying, I've been doing this all my life. I just never had a word for it.
Never put a name on it.
Yeah, The Heart and Art of NetWeaving started out with Xerox printing it by virtue of me helping a senior executive at Xerox. And for almost 10 years, they printed the book, and all $20 from the sale of the book went to charity. Then my champion at Xerox left. They no longer are printing it, so I decided to keep the charitable component so you can download the book as a PDF from the website for free. I put a little note in there. If you liked it, donate a minimum of $10 to your favorite charity or to the Pay It Forward Foundation, on whose board I still serve. And so they can do both those things. They can take the quiz and they can do that. Now, by the end of the year, I hope to have a new concept called a digital badge that I'll be producing through. It probably is going to be through Kennesaw State University, and it's using the new gamification technology. So those are kind of the 3 ways, the 2 that are immediate, and the third that will hopefully be on the way, and down the road maybe we can send that out to your readership, your listenership, when it's done.
Yeah, that is so awesome. So love your energy, love your vision, and these are practical things people can put into place that will pay off large dividends in their business, but mainly even their personal life and how they can be watching for ways to help others and to serve others. So, Bob, thank you so much for your time today. It was wonderful getting to know you.
Great. Well, listen, Mike, thanks so much. I look forward to working with you in a number of different ways that we've talked about. So
sounds good. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.